In the drawing rooms and corridors of Victorian England, a particular kind of intimacy flourished, one built not on touch or declaration, but on silence, distance, and the exquisite discipline of restraint. To understand this world is to understand that the Victorians had developed an entire emotional vocabulary around what was not done, not said, not touched. This was not repression in the way we might imagine it today, but rather a sophisticated cultural system in which desire found its expression precisely through denial. Consider a typical afternoon in a well-appointed Victorian home. The drawing room is filled with golden light, falling through tall windows in long, heavy beams. A woman stands near the fireplace, her posture perfect, her spine straight, her hand resting lightly on the marble mantelpiece. She appears to be examining a small porcelain figure, a shepherdess. But her breathing has changed. It has become shallower, quieter. She is aware of someone else in the room in the way that people are aware of flame when they stand too close to it, not by looking, but by feeling the heat. Near the door stands a gentleman. He does not move toward her. He does not speak. His hands remain at his sides, his weight evenly distributed, his face composed. This is how it was done. This was the only way it could be done. To move would break the spell. To speak would collapse the moment into language, and language was far too small, too crude to hold what was happening between them. The Victorians understood something that has been largely forgotten. They understood that touch is, paradoxically, the least intimate thing two people can do. Touch ends the question. Touch resolves. But to stand near someone, close enough to feel the warmth rising from their skin, close enough to hear the small adjustment of fabric when they shift their weight, close enough to know that if one moved one's hand even slightly, it would meet theirs. And to do nothing, to remain perfectly still, to let that possibility hang in the air like smoke, this is where desire truly lives. Not in the body, but in the mind, in the terrible, exquisite discipline of not moving at all. In this particular drawing room, silence grows like water rising until both figures are submerged in it. The only sounds are the faint crackle of the fire and the nearly inaudible whisper of her skirts when she shifts her weight. She knows she is being observed. She must know. But she does not turn. Instead, she lifts her hand from the mantelpiece. Slowly, so slowly, the movement seems to take minutes, and brings it to the locket at her throat. Her fingers touch the gold chain. They do not grasp it. They do not pull. They simply rest there very lightly, and the gesture is so small, so restrained, that it feels almost violent in its intimacy. This was the paradox of Victorian courtship among the middle and upper classes. The smaller the gesture, the greater its significance. A hand raised to a throat. A glance held 1 second too long. A pause before answering a question. These minute adjustments in behavior carried entire volumes of meaning to those trained to read them. Outside this room, the world continues. Carriages pass in the street. Servants carry trays up narrow staircases. Clocks tick in hallways. But in here, time has slowed to something thicker, more viscous. Both individuals are caught in it, like insects in amber, preserved in a single elongated moment that refuses to end. And the longer it continues, the more unbearable it becomes. Unbearable not in the way of pain, but in the way of something too sweet, too rich, too concentrated to hold without trembling. She turns her head. not toward him, just slightly to the side, as though she has heard something in the hallway, but there is nothing in the hallway. This is a pretense, and both know it is a pretense. She is giving herself permission to move, to shift the angle of her face, to present a new line, the curve of her jaw, the pale length of her throat, for observation. She is offering this without offering it. She is making it seem accidental, and because it seems accidental, he is allowed to look. His gaze rests on the place where her pulse beats beneath the skin, just above the collar of her dress, where the fabric is fastened with a dozen tiny buttons. He thinks of those buttons, of the patient minutes required for her maid to fasten them one by one. Getting dressed, for a woman of this era, was itself a kind of surrender. It required trust, assistance, someone else's hands on one's body. The layers and structures that held a woman upright during the day were not things she could manage alone. And now he is seeing the result of all that labor, all that care. He is seeing what was meant to be seen. But he is also seeing what was not meant to be seen. The small imperfection in the line of her collar, the single dark curl that has escaped its pins and lies against the nape of her neck, the faint shadow beneath her eyes suggesting she did not sleep well. She lowers her hand from her throat. She folds her hands in front of her, one over the other, in the way women were taught to hold themselves when standing still. But her fingers are not relaxed. There is tension in them, a slight whitening of the knuckles when she presses her palms together. She is holding herself very carefully. She is afraid that if she does not hold herself carefully, she will do something she is not supposed to do. She will turn, she will look at him, she will speak. And then this will become something else, something smaller, something that can be named. Neither wants it to be named. So both remain silent, both remain still. And the silence between them becomes a third presence in the room, something alive and watchful, growing denser with each passing second. This restraint was not simply a matter of propriety, though propriety was certainly part of it. It was about power, about control, about the maintenance of an entire social system that depended on people knowing their roles and performing them flawlessly. To declare oneself openly was to become vulnerable. One could be refused. One could be humiliated. One could be sent away. For a woman especially, any hint of forward behavior could destroy her reputation irrevocably. A man might survive such a scandal, albeit damaged. A woman would not. So they protected themselves by remaining distant. This was the unspoken bargain they had both made. They would not risk themselves. They would not reach for each other. They would only stand in this room, in this light, and allow the possibility to exist. The possibility that something might happen. The possibility that one might move, might speak, might break the spell. But the possibility was all they would allow themselves. What was happening here was not about satisfaction or resolution. It was about the exquisite torment of wanting something and not having it. It was about holding oneself at the edge of something and not letting oneself fall. The Victorians became masters of this art. They understood that desire, when contained, when restrained, when never allowed to complete itself, becomes something else. Something purer, something that can last for years, for decades, for an entire lifetime. A glance across a room, a pause in conversation, a letter that says nothing and everything. These small moments, these restrained gestures, became the architecture of entire emotional lives. They became the things one thought about when alone, the things one returned to again and again in the mind. Private theaters of memory and imagination where the social rules that governed public life could be temporarily suspended, but only in thought, never in deed. The light in the drawing room is changing now. The sun is lower. The beams that fall through the windows are no longer golden, but amber, deeper, richer, the color of honey or old wine. Shadows pool in the corners, under the furniture, beneath the hem of her skirts. Soon it will be evening. Soon someone will come to light the lamps. Soon this moment will be interrupted, and both will step back into their public roles. And this thing that is happening will recede into the background, where it will wait, patient and undiminished, until the next opportunity arises. But for now, they are still here, still standing in this thickened time, in this silence that has become almost solid. Both are aware, with a clarity that is almost painful, of everything: the sound of breathing, the faint rustle of fabric, the way light catches in hair, the small involuntary movements, the slight lift of shoulders when inhaling, the barely perceptible tilt of head when listening, the way fingers tighten and release as though trying to hold on to something that keeps slipping away. He is aware of his own body as well, the weight of his coat, the tightness of his collar, the heat rising in his chest, his throat, his face, the effort it takes to remain still, to not move, to not cross the room and stand beside her, close enough that sleeves would brush, close enough to speak, in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. There is no law preventing it, no explicit rule, but there is something stronger than law, stronger than written rule. There is the knowledge that to close the distance would be to admit something, to declare oneself. And once one has declared oneself, one becomes vulnerable to consequences that could reshape an entire life. This is the bargain both have made without speaking, without even acknowledging that a bargain exists. They will not risk themselves. They will not reach for each other. They will only stand here and allow the possibility to exist. And the possibility must be enough. It has to be enough. The Victorians built an entire language around this restraint, a language of gestures and glances and weighted silences, a fan held at a particular angle, a handkerchief dropped at precisely the right moment, a pause in conversation that lasted 1 second too long. These were the words they used. These were the sentences they constructed. And if one knew how to read this language, if one was fluent in it, entire conversations could unfold without a single word being spoken. Love could be declared, longing expressed, desire confessed, all without uttering a sound, all without ever touching. She turns, finally, not all the way, just enough that her profile becomes visible, the line of her nose, the curve of her lips, the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheek. She is looking toward the window now, toward the garden beyond, where light is fading and trees are darkening into silhouettes. But she is not seeing the garden. She is watching him in the periphery of her vision. She is observing without observing in the same way he has been watching her. And now that both are caught in this web of mutual observation, there is no escape. They are bound to each other, not by touch, not by words, but by attention, by the simple, devastating fact that they are aware of each other. The door opens. Someone enters, a servant perhaps, or another guest. The spell is broken, not shattered, but broken gently, carefully, like the surface of water when a single leaf falls onto it. The ripples spread outward, and then the surface goes still again, and everything returns to normal. Almost normal. She straightens slightly. He steps back. The servant lights a lamp. The room brightens. The moment is over. But it is not over. It will never be over. What has happened in this room, in this silence, in this stillness, cannot be undone. It cannot be forgotten. It has created a connection between them, invisible and unbreakable, and that connection will persist. It will persist when they see each other again at dinner, sitting across the table, faces polite and distant. It will persist when they pass in hallways, bodies carefully angled to avoid even the possibility of accidental contact. It will persist when each lies alone in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of this encounter. And each will do the same. Each will remember. Each will think about the other. Each will wonder what the other is thinking about. And this wondering, this thinking, this endless internal conversation that never becomes external, never becomes real, this is where they will live together. Not in the world, but in their minds. In the space between what is and what might be. In the gap between desire and action. This was Victorian intimacy. This was desire without touch. This was the art of wanting and not having, of longing and not reaching, of feeling everything and showing nothing. It required discipline, patience, restraint. It required the ability to endure discomfort, to sit with tension, to allow things to remain unresolved. It was not easy. It was not natural. But it was, in its way, more profound than anything physical could ever be, because it lived entirely in the mind. And the mind, unlike the body, has no limits. The mind can hold a single moment forever. The mind can return to it, examine it, savor it again and again without ever exhausting it. One is standing in a hallway now. She has left the room. Her footsteps on the stairs grow fainter, then disappear entirely. He is alone, but he does not feel alone. Her presence lingers like warmth in the air, like a scent that remains after someone has passed. Eyes close, breath comes. The memory of the last hour settles like a blanket, and the knowledge arrives that tonight, when the house is quiet and dark, this memory will be taken out and examined the way a jeweler examines a gemstone, turning it over, looking at it from every angle, marveling at its facets, its depths, its light. And she will do the same. In her room, in her bed, in the darkness, she will remember. She will think about the way he stood near the door, the way he did not move, the way he watched, and she will feel again that strange, sweet ache that comes from being seen without being touched, from being wanted without being possessed, from being desired in a way that is entirely mental, entirely restrained, entirely impossible to satisfy. This is what they have given each other. Not a moment of pleasure, but a lifetime of longing. Not an experience, but a memory that will deepen and ripen over time, becoming richer, more complex, more painful, and more beautiful. With each passing year, this memory will be carried always. It will become part of identity. It will shape thoughts, dreams, desires. It will make every other experience seem pale and thin by comparison, because nothing else will ever match the intensity of this restrained, unspoken, unconsummated intimacy. For those who lived within this system, who absorbed its rules from childhood, this was not experienced as deprivation, but as a kind of exaltation. The very impossibility of satisfaction became the source of its power. What could not be had could not be diminished. What was never touched could never be spoiled by the mundane realities of daily life. The evening arrives, the house quiets. One is in one's room now, removing coat, collar, the layers of clothing that have provided structure throughout the day. Washing face and hands. The water is cold. It brings one back into the body, into the present moment. But even as these familiar rituals unfold, the mind is elsewhere, thinking about her, about the way she stood near the fireplace, about the way she touched the locket at her throat, about the way she turned her head, offering a new angle for observation, about the way her breathing changed when weight shifted, about all the small, invisible, infinitely significant moments that composed that hour. And somewhere in the house, in her own room, she is doing the same, going through her own rituals of undressing, of preparation for bed. Her maid unfastens all those tiny buttons, one by one, reversing the morning's labor. She is freed from the structures that held her upright, freed into the privacy of nightclothes and solitude. And when she is finally alone, when the maid has departed and the door is closed, she too will think. She will remember. She will replay. She will allow herself, in the privacy of her own mind, to feel everything she was not allowed to feel in that room. The desire, the longing, the ache, the terrible, exquisite pleasure of wanting something and not having it. This was the secret life of respectable Victorians. This is what they did when alone. They thought, they remembered, they imagined, they took the small, restrained moments of their days and expanded them in their minds into entire worlds. They lived more vividly in their imaginations than they could ever live in reality, because reality was constrained. Reality had rules. But the mind was free. The mind could go anywhere, do anything. The mind could touch even when the body could not. Lying in bed now, in darkness, the room is silent. The house is still. One's own breathing is the only sound. Eyes close. The attempt is made to empty the mind, to find sleep. But the mind will not empty. It continues to generate images, memories, fantasies. Her face, her hands, the corridor, the window, the rain. They cycle through consciousness like scenes in a magic lantern show, one image replacing another in an endless loop. One turns onto one side, pulls the blankets higher, tries different positions, searching for one that will allow relaxation, release, the surrender into sleep. But sleep does not come easily tonight. The body is too tense, the mind too active, too present, so one lies in darkness and lets time pass. Minutes become hours, perhaps. It is difficult to know. Time has lost its shape, its definition. There is only the present moment, extended indefinitely, filled with a familiar discomfort and longing. Eventually, imperceptibly, consciousness begins to drift, not quite into sleep, but into something adjacent to it, a state where thoughts become less distinct, where images blur and blend, where the boundary between inner and outer becomes permeable. In this liminal space, one is in the corridor again, or in a room, or in a garden. The location shifts, but she is always there, sometimes close, sometimes distant, sometimes looking, sometimes turned away, but always present, always the center of everything. There is communication happening, though no words are spoken. Understanding flows between two minds without language. What one thinks, the other knows. There is no barrier, no distance, no restraint. They are together in a way they have never been together in waking life, completely, totally, without reservation. And then consciousness surfaces again, waking or near waking? The room is still dark, but the quality of darkness has changed. Morning is approaching, though it has not yet arrived. This is the strange time between night and day, when the world is neither one thing nor the other, when anything seems possible. One lies very still, reluctant to move, to fully wake, to let go of the dream's remnants, because in the dream there was completion, there was wholeness, and waking means returning to fragmentation, to division, to the constant war between desire and discipline. But the dream cannot be held. It dissolves with attention, so it is released, and full waking is allowed, and eyes open to the gray light of pre-dawn. The room is cold, empty. One is alone. This is the truth encountered every morning. This is the reality that must be faced day after day. One rises, one dresses, one prepares for another round of carefully orchestrated social performance, another series of meals and conversations and obligations, another accumulation of glances and pauses and silences, another day of wanting and not having, another day of proximity without connection. The breakfast room, early. Few people are awake yet. Light streams through tall windows, clear and cold. Food sits on the sideboard. One serves oneself mechanically without real appetite and sits at the long table to eat without tasting. The motions are performed. The role is enacted. But consciousness is elsewhere, as it is always elsewhere. The door opens. One does not need to look. Her presence is immediately sensible. A change in temperature, a shift in the quality of light and air. She enters. She moves to the sideboard. The small sounds of her serving herself are distinct and clear. The clink of silver on porcelain, the whisper of fabric. She sits, not near, not far, at the careful middle distance that is always maintained. She does not offer a greeting. No greeting is offered in return. This is normal, acceptable. People do not always acknowledge each other at breakfast. To do so might draw unwanted attention. So both sit in silence, both eating, both apparently absorbed in private thoughts, but both acutely, painfully aware of each other. Every sound is tracked, every movement registered, the scrape of fork against plate, the tap of teacup being set down, the soft exhalation of breath. She is tense this morning, movements slightly more abrupt than usual. Something troubles her, or perhaps she simply did not sleep well. Perhaps she spent the night as one did, lying awake, thinking, unable to find rest. The desire to ask, to speak, to offer comfort is strong, but the gulf between wanting and being able is vast, uncrossable, so silence is maintained. Breakfast is finished, one rises, and as movement toward the door begins, a single glance is allowed. Just one, quick, brief, easily deniable if anyone were observing. She is looking down at her plate. Her profile is visible. Morning light falls across her face, illuminating the curve of cheek, the line of jaw, the small wisps of hair that have escaped careful arrangement. She is beautiful. This has always been known, but sometimes the knowledge arrives with fresh force, as though seeing for the first time. She is beautiful, and she is unreachable. And these two facts are somehow connected, intertwined, each feeding the other in an endless loop. The room is left behind. The hallway is walked. No particular destination exists. Movement itself provides purpose, however minimal. Rooms are passed where others are beginning to stir. Voices are heard, muffled by closed doors. The house is waking. Soon it will be full of people, full of noise and activity and demands. Soon one will have to be present, engaged, performing one's social self with energy and conviction. But for now, for these few remaining moments, there is solitude, there is quiet, small pockets of privacy scattered throughout the day, moments when the performance can be dropped, when one can simply be oneself, whoever that is. Though the answer to that question has become unclear. The performance has continued for so long that it has become indistinguishable from any authentic self. Perhaps there is no authentic self. Perhaps there is only the performance, refined and perfected over years until it runs automatically, requiring no conscious effort. One finds oneself in the library. The choice was not conscious, but here one is. The room is empty. Books line the walls from floor to ceiling. The air smells of leather and paper and dust, a comforting combination that suggests permanence, reliability. Fingers run along the spines of books, not searching for anything specific, simply touching them, connecting with them, reassuring oneself of their solidity. A book is pulled from the shelf at random and opened. The pages are yellowed with age. The type is small and dense. A few lines are read. They mean nothing. The words are comprehensible individually, but do not penetrate, do not connect to anything in experience. The book is closed, replaced on the shelf. One sits in a leather chair, large and heavy, designed for comfort. Weight settles, eyes close. The exhaustion is not physical, but mental, emotional. Tired of wanting, tired of restraining, tired of the constant vigilance required to maintain a facade of normalcy, while inner life churns with unacknowledged feelings. What would happen if one simply stopped? If permission were given to feel everything that has been suppressed and to let it show? What would happen if one went to her and spoke plainly, directly, truthfully about what is felt? The answer is known. Scandal, humiliation, rejection. Even if feelings were mutual, the mere act of declaring them would ruin everything. It would make the private public. It would force decisions, actions, consequences. It would require either marriage or separation, and both options carry impossibilities. Marriage because circumstances, timing, and 1,000 practical considerations stand in the way. Separation because neither could bear it. So this is what remains. This endless stalemate. This permanent suspension. The pattern will continue. Seeing each other at meals, at gatherings, in hallways, exchanging glances, sharing silences, building an invisible connection one small moment at a time, and never speaking of it, never acknowledging it, never bringing it into the light where it could be examined, questioned, validated, or dismissed. This is the choice. Or perhaps it is not a choice at all. Perhaps it is simply what is, the only option available to people in these circumstances, in this time, in this world. Love that could not be expressed except through restraint. Desire that could not be satisfied except through denial. Intimacy that existed only in the space between people, never in their coming together. This was not unique to one pair of individuals. This pattern played out in drawing rooms and gardens and ballrooms across England, across Europe, across the Western world, wherever Victorian values held sway. Thousands of men and women living parallel lives, outwardly proper, inwardly consumed by longings they could not express and connections they could not formalize. The rules were clear. Reputation was everything. A woman's value, her future, her very survival in society depended on maintaining absolute propriety. A single misstep could destroy her. A man had more latitude, but he too faced consequences for violating social norms. lost opportunities, damaged prospects, exclusion from circles that mattered. So people learned to live within the constraints. They became fluent in the language of restraint. They found ways to create meaning, to build relationships, to experience intimacy, all while maintaining the appearance of perfect propriety. And in their private hours, in their rooms at night, in the privacy of their own minds, they lived the lives they could not live in reality. They imagined, they dreamed, they replayed every small interaction, extracting from it every possible layer of meaning. The door to the library opens. Eyes open immediately. Posture straightens automatically. But it is only a servant come to tend the fire. Work proceeds quietly, efficiently. The servant does not notice the room's occupant, or pretends not to. They are part of the background, part of the invisible labor that maintain the comfortable fiction of order and ease. The servant finishes and departs. Solitude returns. One should leave as well. There are duties, responsibilities, expectations to meet. But movement does not come. Sitting continues. Time passes in this empty waiting, this suspension that has become the default state of being. Waiting, always waiting. For what exactly? For something to change? For permission to act? For an end to this exquisite torture? But nothing will change. Nothing ever changes. And so the waiting continues. The garden again. Late afternoon. Somehow one's feet have carried one here, down stone steps, onto gravel paths that wind between hedges. The light has that particular quality, soft, diffuse, a visual quietness that matches the stillness of the air. Nothing moves, no breeze stirs leaves, no birds call. The world has paused, holding its breath, walking slowly, no destination, simply moving through space while mind drifts elsewhere. Thoughts will not cohere today. They float like smoke, dissipating before they can be grasped. This is perhaps merciful. When thoughts become too clear, too focused, they turn inevitably toward her, and then the ache begins. But she is present anyway. She has become part of the landscape of mind. Her face appears in the pattern of light through leaves. Her voice is heard in the sound of one's own breathing. She has infiltrated everything. There is no corner of inner life she has not touched, has not altered in some subtle but permanent way. At the far end of the garden sits a stone bench beneath an old tree. The bench is weathered, covered in pale green lichen, cool to the touch. Hands rest on the stone. The roughness of it can be felt, the slight dampness, the coldness seeping into palms. These sensations are real, concrete. They anchor one to the physical world, to the present moment. But even while attending to these physical sensations, part of consciousness is elsewhere. Part is in that corridor at the window, listening to her breathe. Part is in the drawing room, watching her hand on the mantelpiece. Part is in all the moments shared without sharing, all the encounters that were not quite encounters. Eyes close. The darkness behind eyelids is not complete. Light can still be sensed, a reddish glow that shifts and pulses gently. Focus turns to breathing, in and out, slow and steady. The attempt is made to empty the mind, to find some measure of peace, some respite from the constant low-level distress. But the mind will not empty. It continues its work. Images, memories, fantasies, always returning to the same subject, to her. What is she doing now? Where in the house is she? Is she in her room, sitting by a window, looking at this same garden? Is she thinking of this shared predicament? Or is she content in a way one cannot be? Perhaps these encounters mean less to her. Perhaps they are merely pleasant distractions in an otherwise unremarkable day. The thought causes sharp pain, eyes open. That possibility cannot be entertained. One cannot believe this is entirely one-sided. That meaning has been constructed where none exists. The belief that she feels it too, that she is equally trapped, equally consumed, this belief may be a delusion, but it is a necessary one. Without it, everything collapses. The entire carefully constructed architecture of meaning depends on the assumption that this is mutual. So both sit in silence, both eating, both apparently absorbed in private thoughts, but both acutely, painfully aware of each other. Every sound is tracked, every movement registered, the scrape of fork against plate, the tap of teacup being set down, the soft exhalation of breath. She is tense this morning, movement slightly more abrupt than usual. Something troubles her, or perhaps she simply did not sleep well. Perhaps she spent the night as one did, lying awake, thinking, unable to find rest. The desire to ask, to speak, to offer comfort is strong, but the gulf between wanting and being able is vast, uncrossable. So silence is maintained, breakfast is finished, one rises. And as movement toward the door begins, a single glance is allowed, just one, quick, brief, easily deniable if anyone were observing. She is looking down at her plate. Her profile is visible. Morning light falls across her face, illuminating the curve of cheek, the line of jaw, the small wisps of hair that have escaped careful arrangement. She is beautiful. This has always been known, but sometimes the knowledge arrives with fresh force, as though seeing for the first time. She is beautiful, and she is unreachable. And these two facts are somehow connected, intertwined, each feeding the other in an endless loop. The room is left behind. The hallway is walked. No particular destination exists. Movement itself provides purpose, however minimal. Rooms are passed where others are beginning to stir. Voices are heard, muffled by closed doors. The house is waking. Soon it will be full of people, full of noise and activity and demands. Soon one will have to be present, engaged, performing one's social self with energy and conviction. But for now, for these few remaining moments, there is solitude, there is quiet, small pockets of privacy scattered throughout the day, moments when the performance can be dropped, when one can simply be oneself, whoever that is. Though the answer to that question has become unclear, the performance has continued for so long that it has become indistinguishable from any authentic self. Perhaps there is no authentic self. Perhaps there is only the performance, refined and perfected over years till it runs automatically, requiring no conscious effort. One finds oneself in the library. The choice was not conscious, but here one is. The room is empty. Books line the walls from floor to ceiling. The air smells of leather and paper and dust, a comforting combination that suggests permanence, reliability. Fingers run along the spines of books, not searching for anything specific, simply touching them, connecting with them, reassuring oneself of their solidity. A book is pulled from the shelf at random and opened. The pages are yellowed with age. The type is small and dense. A few lines are read. They mean nothing. The words are comprehensible individually, but do not penetrate, do not connect to anything in experience. The book is closed, replaced on the shelf. One sits in a leather chair, large and heavy, designed for comfort. Weight settles. Eyes close. The exhaustion is not physical but mental, emotional. tired of wanting, tired of restraining, tired of the constant vigilance required to maintain a facade of normalcy while inner life churns with unacknowledged feelings. What would happen if one simply stopped, if permission were given to feel everything that has been suppressed and to let it show? What would happen if one went to her and spoke plainly, directly, truthfully about what is felt? The answer is known: scandal, humiliation, rejection. Even if feelings were mutual, the mere act of declaring them would ruin everything. It would make the private public. It would force decisions, actions, consequences. It would require either marriage or separation, and both options carry impossibilities. Marriage because circumstances, timing, and 1,000 practical considerations stand in the way. Separation because neither could bear it. So this is what remains. This endless stalemate, this permanent suspension. The pattern will continue, seeing each other at meals, at gatherings, in hallways, exchanging glances, sharing silences, building an invisible connection one small moment at a time, and never speaking of it, never acknowledging it, never bringing it into the light where it could be examined, questioned, validated, or dismissed. This is the choice. Or perhaps it is not a choice at all. Perhaps it is simply what is. The only option available to people in these circumstances, in this time, in this world, in this love that could not be expressed except through restraint, desire that could not be satisfied except through denial, intimacy that existed only in the space between people, never in their coming together. This was not unique to one pair of individuals. This pattern played out in drawing rooms and gardens and ballrooms across England, across Europe, across the Western world, wherever Victorian values held sway. Thousands of men and women living parallel lives, outwardly proper, inwardly consumed by longings they could not express and connections they could not formalize. The rules were clear. Reputation was everything. A woman's value, her future, her very survival in society, depended on maintaining absolute propriety. A single misstep could destroy her. A man had more latitude, but he too faced consequences for violating social norms, lost opportunities, damaged prospects, exclusion from circles that mattered. So people learned to live within the constraints. They became fluent in the language of restraint. They found ways to create meaning, to build relationships, to experience intimacy, all while maintaining the appearance of perfect propriety. And in their private hours, in their rooms at night, in the privacy of their own minds, they lived the lives they could not live in reality. They imagined, they dreamed, they replayed every small interaction, extracting from it every possible layer of meaning. The door to the library opens, eyes open immediately, posture straightens automatically. But it is only a servant come to tend the fire. Work proceeds quietly, efficiently. The servant does not notice the room's occupant, or pretends not to. They are part of the background, part of the invisible labor that maintained the comfortable fiction of order and ease. The servant finishes and departs. Solitude returns. One should leave as well. There are duties, responsibilities, expectations to meet. But movement does not come. Sitting continues. Time passes in this empty waiting, this suspension that has become the default state of being. Waiting. Always waiting. For what exactly? For something to change? For permission to act? For an end to this exquisite torture? But nothing will change. Nothing ever changes. And so the waiting continues. The garden again. Late afternoon. Somehow one's feet have carried one here down stone steps, onto gravel paths that wind between hedges. The light has that particular quality, soft, diffuse, a visual quietness that matches the stillness of the air. Nothing moves, no breeze stirs leaves, no birds call. The world has paused, holding its breath, walking slowly, no destination, simply moving through space while mind drifts elsewhere. Thoughts will not cohere today. They float like smoke, dissipating before they can be grasped. This is perhaps merciful. When thoughts become too clear, too focused, they turn inevitably toward her, and then the ache begins. But she is present anyway. She has become part of the landscape of mind. Her face appears in the pattern of light through leaves. Her voice is heard in the sound of one's own breathing. She has infiltrated everything. There is no corner of inner life she has not touched, has not altered in some subtle but permanent way. At the far end of the garden sits a stone bench beneath an old tree. The bench is weathered, covered in pale green lichen, cool to the touch. Hands rest on the stone. The roughness of it can be felt, the slight dampness, the coldness seeping into palms. These sensations are real, concrete. They anchor one to the physical world, to the present moment. But even while attending to these physical sensations, part of consciousness is elsewhere. Part is in that corridor, at the window, listening to her breathe. Part is in the drawing room, watching her hand on the mantelpiece. Part is in all the moments shared without sharing, all the encounters that were not quite encounters. Eyes close. The darkness behind eyelids is not complete. Light can still be sensed, a reddish glow that shifts and pulses gently. Focus turns to breathing, in and out, slow and steady. The attempt is made to empty the mind, to find some measure of peace, some respite from the constant low-level distress. But the mind will not empty. It continues its work. Images, memories, fantasies, always returning to the same subject, to her. What is she doing now? Where in the house is she? Is she in her room, sitting by a window, looking at this same garden? Is she thinking of this shared predicament? Or is she content in a way one cannot be? Perhaps these encounters mean less to her. Perhaps they are merely pleasant distractions in an otherwise unremarkable day. The thought causes sharp pain, eyes open. That possibility cannot be entertained. One cannot believe this is entirely one-sided, that meaning has been constructed where none exists. The belief that she feels it too, that she is equally trapped, equally consumed, this belief may be a delusion, but it is a necessary one. Without it, everything collapses. The entire carefully constructed architecture of meaning depends on the assumption that this is mutual. Rising from the bench, legs stiff from stillness, light has faded considerably. The garden is in shadow. The house glows softly in the distance, windows lit from within. Walking back begins, slowly, reluctantly, not ready to return, wanting to stay here in the garden, in the darkness, replaying what just happened, trying to understand. But staying is not possible. The evening meal will be served soon. Absence would be noted, so return proceeds. Steps are climbed. The house is entered. Warmth envelops immediately. Heat from fires, smell of cooking, sound of voices and movement. Back in the world, the real world, the world of other people and their demands. The world where roles must be performed, composure maintained, where one must pretend nothing extraordinary churns beneath the surface. To one's room, changing for dinner, standing before the mirror, adjusting collar, cuffs, expression, making oneself presentable, acceptable, and all the while, underneath the surface, underneath the careful arrangement, mind churns, thinking about her, about the garden, about the way she moved closer, about what it might mean, about what should be done now. But there is nothing to do. There is only what there has always been, waiting, watching, maintaining silence, keeping distance even as everything screams to close it. This is the life. This is the choice. This is the only way it can be. Leaving the room, walking downstairs, entering the dining room where others are gathered, and there she is, across the room, speaking to someone, smiling. She does not look over. She does not acknowledge. Everything is as it always is, proper, distant, restrained, but knowledge exists, and she knows that one knows, and that knowledge, shared and unspoken, is all there is, all there will ever be, and somehow, impossibly, it is enough. In their private hours, in bedrooms at night, in studies during stolen moments of solitude, respectable Victorians lived lives of extraordinary vividness that no outsider ever saw. They thought, they remembered, they imagined. They took the small restrained moments of their days and expanded them into entire interior worlds. Letters were written that were never sent. Pages filled with confessions that no one would ever read. Drawers accumulated these documents, evidence of secret lives that ran parallel to public ones. One sits at a desk late at night. Paper and pen are taken out. Writing begins. Not to her, never to her, but words nevertheless. Words that will never be sent, never shown. Words that exist only for oneself. Writing about the corridor, about the rain, about the sound of her breathing, about her hands, about the way she stands, about the feeling when she is near, the tightness in chest, the difficulty breathing, the sense that the world has contracted to just two people, that nothing else exists, nothing else matters. The words flow easily. They have been building, pressing against silence, demanding expression. Now, permission is given, and they pour out, filling page after page with cramped, precise handwriting. No reading of what has been written. Fear exists that if read, the patheticness will be revealed. How ridiculous, a grown person obsessing over someone barely known, constructing elaborate fantasies around a few glances and pauses. It is absurd. It is childish. It is exactly what is happening. When several pages are filled, stopping occurs. Hand cramps. Eyes tire. The pages are gathered, folded carefully. And then what is always done, placement in a drawer with all the other pages written over months and years. Letters to no one. Confessions to empty rooms. Evidence of a secret life no one will know about. The drawer closes. The lamp is extinguished. Preparation for bed begins. In bed, in darkness, lying on back, staring at ceiling barely visible in the dark, thinking about her again, always thinking about her, wondering if she is in bed too, if she lies in her room, in darkness, thinking in return. The need to believe she is, the need to believe she feels this too. It is powerful, perhaps overwhelming. Because if this is one-sided, if all this meaning has been constructed alone, then one is not engaged in complex courtship. One is simply deluded, obsessed, alone in fantasy. But the belief persists that she feels it too. Evidence has been seen, the way she looks, the way her breathing changes, the way she arranges herself in space, always aware of location, always positioning in relation. She is as trapped as one is trapped, both caught in the same web, both playing the same game of approach and retreat, proximity and distance, desire and restraint, eyes close. The attempt is made to think of nothing, But it is impossible. The mind is too active, too full. Images keep appearing. Her face, her hands, the corridor, the window, the rain. They cycle through consciousness endlessly, turning on to side, pulling blankets higher, trying different positions. But sleep does not come. Too tense, too aware, too present. So lying continues in darkness, letting time pass. Minutes, hours, unknown. Eventually, without awareness, drifting begins. Not into sleep exactly, into something adjacent. A state where thoughts become less distinct. Images blur. Boundaries between inner and outer become permeable. In this liminal space, one is in the corridor again, or in a room or garden. The location shifts, but she is always there. Sometimes close, sometimes far. Sometimes looking, sometimes turned away. Always present, always central. Communication happens without words. Understanding flows between minds. What one thinks, the other knows. No barrier, no distance, no restraint. Together in a way never achieved in waking life. Completely, without reservation. And then waking, or near waking. The room still dark, but darkness changed. Morning approaching though not arrived. That strange liminal time between night and day when anything seems possible. Lying very still, reluctant to move, to fully wake, to release the dream's remnants. Because in the dream there was completion, wholeness. Waking means returning to fragmentation, to the constant war between desire and discipline. But dreams cannot be held. They dissolve. So release happens, waking proceeds, and eyes open to gray pre-dawn light. The room is cold, empty, alone. This is the truth faced every morning. This is the reality of daily life. Rising, dressing, preparing for another round of social performance. Another series of meals, conversations, obligations. Another accumulation of glances, pauses, silences. Another day of wanting without having. Another day of proximity without connection. For thousands of people living within Victorian social structures, this was normal. This was what life meant. Public propriety masking private turbulence, faces composed while hearts raced. Bodies carefully positioned while minds ranged freely through imagined scenarios that could never be enacted. The system was not designed to promote happiness or fulfillment in the modern sense. It was designed to maintain order, preserve reputations, ensure appropriate marriages, protect family interests. Individual feelings, while not entirely ignored, were expected to be subordinated to these larger concerns. And yet, within these tight constraints, people found ways to create meaning. They developed sophisticated emotional vocabularies that could operate entirely beneath the surface of social interaction. They became experts at reading minute signals, a slight change in tone, a particular way of holding the body, a glance that lasted a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. These small communications became the substance of entire relationships. Relationships that might last years, even decades, without ever being formally acknowledged or consummated. Relationships that existed primarily in the minds of the participants, sustained by memory and imagination, rather than by physical proximity or verbal declaration. This was not repression in the crude sense we might imagine. It was a complex cultural system that generated its own forms of intensity, its own kinds of satisfaction, or at least its own ways of making the lack of satisfaction bearable, even meaningful. Days pass. Encounters recur, at dinner, at tea, in hallways, in the garden. Each encounter brief, each perfectly proper, But beneath the surface, beneath polite words and careful gestures, something else continues. A conversation no one else can hear. Words spoken without speaking, touch without touching, a glance lasting a fraction of a second too long, a pause before answering a question, a smile that does not quite reach the eyes. These are the vocabulary. These are the sentences constructed. And she understands. She reads them fluently. She responds in kind. A slight tilt of head, a small intake of breath, a hand moving to throat, to hair, to sleeve. These are her words, her sentences. This is the language of restraint, the language of desire without touch, the language of intimacy at a distance. Both have become masters of it. Volumes can be communicated without saying anything. Everything can be expressed while revealing nothing. And this ability, this skill, this art, is what makes the connection profound. Because it is invisible, because it is secret, because no one else knows it exists. At a dinner party, the room full of people, candles lit, conversation flowing, laughter, music, the clink of glasses, the rustle of silk. Seated across the table from her, her face visible in candlelight, she speaks to the person beside her. She smiles. She is animated, perfectly at ease, but one knows better. One can see that she is aware. It shows in the way she holds herself, the way her eyes flicker just for an instant in one direction before returning to her conversation partner. She is performing. The performance is for observation. No attempt is made to speak to her. No attempt to join her conversation. No need. The conversation is already happening, silent, invisible. She says something. The person beside her laughs. She laughs too. And her eyes meet across the table just for a second, and in that second, everything is visible. She is not really laughing. She is thinking of this shared predicament. She would rather be anywhere else, with anyone else, alone together, in a quiet room, in silence. But alone is impossible. Surrounded always by people. This is the world both were born into. A world of crowds and noise and constant observation. A world where privacy is rare and solitude suspect. A world where two people can never be truly alone unless married, and even then only in their own home. So the skill is learned how to be alone together in public, how to create private space in the middle of a crowded room, how to speak without words, how to touch without touching. The dinner ends. People rise, movement into the drawing room, both swept along with the crowd, separate, distant, but always aware. Her presence can be felt even when she cannot be seen. Location is sensed the way a compass senses north, and she can sense likewise. They are magnets, pulling toward each other, but never allowed to connect. Someone plays piano, someone sings. People gather to listen. One finds oneself near the back of the room, near the door, in shadows. And she is there too, not beside, not close enough to touch, but close enough to hear breathing, close enough to smell faint lavender clinging to her dress, close enough that turning one's head slightly would reveal her face in profile, attention apparently fixed on the singer, expression serene and distant, but no turning, no looking, eyes straight ahead, listening to music, and in the stillness, in the darkness at the back of the room, something shifts. Air becomes thicker. The space between becomes charged, both holding breath, both waiting. For what? Unknown. Only knowing this moment feels different, more intense, like something might happen. But nothing happens. The song ends. Applause. The moment passes, Both exhale, both step away, moving in different directions, rejoining the crowd, resuming roles. The opportunity, whatever it was, is gone, but it will come again. It always comes again. Because this is what life has become, creating these moments, seeking them out, engineering situations of proximity without touching, awareness without acknowledgement, and each time, tension builds higher, restraint becomes harder to maintain, desire becomes more acute. Lying in bed again, late, the house silent. Sleep will not come. Thinking about her, always thinking about her, wondering what she does, whether she sleeps, whether she lies in her bed in darkness, thinking in return, imagining her room, her bed, the way her hair spreads across the pillow, the way her breathing sounds in quiet, imagining crossing the house, climbing stairs, opening her door, entering her room, standing beside her bed, looking down at her sleeping face, reaching out, touching her cheek, so gently she does not wake. But this is only imagination. This would never happen, could never happen. Unthinkable, impossible. The rules too strong, consequences too severe, so remaining in bed, in one's own room, in private darkness, imagining, and the imagining is enough, must be enough. Because this is the bargain, this is the deal made with oneself, with her, with the world. This connection, this intimacy, this desire, but only in mind, only in glances and pauses and silences, only in the space between what is and what might be. And that space, that gap, that absence, that is where one lives, where pleasure is found, not in satisfaction, but in longing, not in having, but in wanting, not in touch, but in the endless, exquisite anticipation of touch that never comes. The seasons turn. Summer fades into autumn. Light becomes different, cooler, sharper. Leaves turn. Air smells of smoke and earth. Walking in the garden, early evening, sun low, everything golden and red and amber. Alone, or so it seems. But then she is visible, standing near the rose bushes very still, looking at something in her hand, a flower perhaps, a fallen leaf. Walking stops, standing very still, watching her. She lifts her head, turns, sees, eyes meet, and this time something is different. This time there is no one else around, no servants, no guests, no witnesses, just the two of them in the garden in fading light, just two people and the space between, and silence. She does not move, no movement in return, both waiting, waiting to see what the other will do, waiting to see if this moment will be like all the others, tension, restraint, retreat, or if this time something will change, if this time one will be brave enough to cross the distance, to speak, to reach out, to break the spell, but neither moves, neither speaks, because even now, even in this moment of possibility, fear is too strong, training too deep, consequences too real, so simply standing, looking at each other, and the moment stretches until it feels like breaking, but it does not break, it only bends, deepens, becomes another moment to remember, another piece of this strange, impossible relationship being built in silence. She turns away first, walks back toward the house, watching her go, watching until she disappears inside, until the door closes, until alone again in the garden, and then standing for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just feeling the weight of what did not happen, the heaviness of it, the beauty of it, the sorrow of it. This is the life chosen, or perhaps it chose. The distinction is no longer clear. Only knowing this is how it is, how it will always be. Moving in parallel, always close, never touching, always aware, never admitting. A kind of torture, a kind of ecstasy, both and neither, something for which there is no word. This pattern was not unique. It repeated itself endlessly across the Victorian world. Different people, different houses, different cities, but the same fundamental dynamic. The same restraints, producing the same longing, producing the same elaborate interior lives where what could not be expressed in reality flourished in imagination. Some of these relationships eventually resolved into marriage. Others ended in separation when family circumstances changed or one party married someone else. Still others simply continued year after year, decade after decade, until death finally severed the connection. But while they lasted, and some lasted entire lifetimes, these relationships provided their participants with something they found nowhere else: an intensity of feeling, a depth of connection, a sense that beneath the surface of ordinary social life, something extraordinary was happening, something secret and precious and entirely their own. Whether this was a healthy or unhealthy dynamic is perhaps the wrong question. It was simply the dynamic that the culture produced. People adapted to it. They found ways to survive within it, even to extract meaning and beauty from it. And when they were old, when they looked back on their lives, what did they remember? Not necessarily the marriages they made, or the children they had, or the social positions they achieved. Often what they remembered most vividly were these unconsummated connections, these relationships of silence and distance, these moments of looking across rooms and gardens and feeling just for an instant that they were seen and known in a way they were seen and known nowhere else. These memories remain sharp and bright and painful and beautiful, a constant ache, a permanent longing, a desire that, because it was never satisfied, never died, but instead lasted forever, preserved perfectly in memory, protected from the diminishments and disappointments that attend all realized desires. In a room now, alone, late at night, sitting by a fire burning low, watching coals glow red and orange, pulsing like something alive, thinking of her hands. This is not unusual, often thinking of her hands, very white, very delicate, fingers long and slender, nails perfectly shaped, pale pink. Never having touched those hands, never having touched any part of her, but having looked many times, studied, memorized, knowing the exact curve of fingers, knowing the way her thumb crosses palm when she clasps hands together, knowing the small movements when nervous, touching her ring, turning it slowly, or pressing fingertips together lightly, as though holding something fragile. Imagining those hands now, imagining them resting in her lap, imagining weight, warmth, softness, imagining what it would feel like to place one's hand over hers, to feel the coolness of skin, the delicate bones beneath flesh, to feel her fingers curl just slightly in response. The thought makes something tighten in chest, not pain exactly, something adjacent to pain, something sweet and sharp and unbearable. Eyes close, letting the image dissolve. It cannot be held. Too much, too intense. If dwelled upon, sleep will not come tonight. Will lie awake, tormented by mental pictures, impossible scenarios that will never become real. So it is released. Attention returns to the fire, to the simple task of watching light flicker and fade. But the thought lingers. It always lingers, even when not actively thinking of her. She is there, her hands, her face, her voice, the way she moves, the way she holds herself when she thinks no one watches. An expert observer now, noticing things others do not notice, small adjustments to posture, the way expression changes when she is bored or tired or unhappy, the way she sometimes looks over when she thinks no observation occurs with an expression that cannot quite be read but that makes the heart race nonetheless. This is life now, observing, remembering, imagining, creating an entire world in mind, a world in which she exists as fully as in reality, perhaps more so. Because in mind, closeness is possible. In mind, touching is possible. In mind, there are no rules, no consequences, no fear. In mind, freedom exists, but freedom is not real, trapped by the very thing that gives life meaning, trapped by desire for her, trapped by the impossibility of satisfying that desire, like someone dying of thirst who can see water but cannot reach it. The water always there, always visible, always just beyond grasp. And the sight of it, instead of comforting, torments, reminding constantly of what is not had, cannot be had, will never be had. Opening eyes, the fire has burned lower still, the room darker, colder, coal should be added, a lamp should be lit, but no movement, sitting in growing darkness, in growing cold, letting it be felt, the discomfort, the emptiness, the ache, because this is honest, this is real, this is what is actually felt beneath all polite conversation and social performance and careful maintenance of appearances. Cold, empty, as though something essential has been removed, leaving behind a hollow space that can never be filled. In a corridor now, no memory of entering it. Walls papered in a pattern that will not come into focus. Something floral, perhaps, or geometric. It shifts when looked at directly. Light is dim, the kind that comes through heavy curtains midday. Neither bright nor dark. Just suspended grayness making everything muted and distant. Walking, though no memory of deciding to walk. Footsteps make no sound on carpet. Air is still. Doors line the corridor, many doors, all closed. What lies behind them is unknown. No attempt is made to open them, looking for something, though unable to remember what. Or perhaps not looking for anything, perhaps simply moving because movement is what one does. Stillness would require decision, and decisions are exhausting, and exhaustion is already overwhelming. Passing a mirror, glancing at reflection, seeing oneself, but not recognizing oneself, or rather recognizing the shape, the outline, but something is missing, something essential, looking like someone who is waiting, someone who has been waiting for a very long time. Face composed, posture correct, but eyes empty, or not empty, full, but full of something without name, something that can never be expressed. Turning from the mirror, continuing walking. The corridor seems endless. Perhaps it is endless. Perhaps walking here has occupied an entire life. Passing these closed doors, looking for something that will never be found, or perhaps has already been found but not recognized. The thought does not disturb. It should, but it does not. Too tired to be disturbed, thinking about her again, always thinking about her. Even when not actively thinking, she is there in the back of mind, a constant presence, a low hum of awareness that never stops. Where is she now? Is she also in a corridor, walking, looking for something unnamed? Perhaps all of this, the house, the rooms, the corridors, the endless waiting, is just a structure both have built to contain desire, a labyrinth with no exit, a puzzle with no solution. There is a window at the corridor's end, a rectangle of lighter gray against darker gray walls, walking toward it. Pace does not change. No hurrying, no reason to hurry, nowhere to arrive. At the window, looking out. The view is obscured by rain, heavy rain, falling in sheets, blurring everything beyond glass. Trees barely visible, the outline of a garden wall, a smudge of sky. Everything softened, dissolved, made indistinct by water, standing at the window for a long time, not looking at anything in particular, just standing, just being present in this space, this moment, this endless gray afternoon that might be any afternoon, that might be every afternoon ever experienced. Time has become strange. It no longer moves forward in a clear line. It pools and eddies. It repeats. Having been here before, we'll be here again. Or perhaps never left. Perhaps always here, standing at this window, watching rain fall on a garden barely seen. Behind, a sound, a door opening. Footsteps, no turning, no need. Knowing who it is, always knowing. She is here, in the corridor, moving closer, or perhaps moving away. Cannot tell. Not looking. Eyes remain on window, on rain, on blurred shapes beyond glass. She stops. The exact moment of her stopping can be felt. The precise instant when movement ceases, when stillness begins. She is not far. Perhaps 10 feet, perhaps less. The distance is small enough to cross in steps, but neither will cross it. This pattern is established. Agreement exists without speaking that there are distances that must not be crossed, lines that must not be breached. So standing, separate, in the same corridor, in the same gray light, and the space between is as solid and impassable as a wall. Neither speaks, nothing to say, or everything to say but no words adequate to contain it. So saying nothing, standing in silence, and the silence is not uncomfortable, not awkward, simply what is, the medium in which existence together occurs. If speaking occurred, something fragile and necessary would shatter. Roles would be forced, questioner and answerer, speaker and listener, and those roles would diminish what they are to each other. So silence is maintained, protected, tended like a flame that must not go out. Rain continues. Light does not change. Time does not move, or moves so slowly its movement cannot be perceived. Suspended here, and the suspension is not unpleasant, almost peaceful, not happy, not unhappy, simply here, present, aware, waiting without expectation, desiring without hope. Her breathing can be heard, very quiet, very controlled, but audible. Having learned to hear it, having learned to distinguish the sound of her breath from all other sounds, knowing the rhythm, knowing when it quickens, when it slows, when it stops for a fraction of a second before resuming. Right now it is steady, calm, but something beneath the calm can be detected. A tremor, a hesitation. She's holding herself carefully, maintaining control. But control requires effort. The effort can be heard in her breathing. What would happen if turning occurred? If looking, if eyes met? Nothing would happen, probably. Looking at each other, acknowledging presence. And then what? Then nothing. Then both would look away. Both would maintain distance. Both would continue as they have been continuing. So no point in turning. The outcome is known. The script is written. Both are performing parts perfectly. But what if the part were not performed? What if the script were broken? What if turning and crossing and standing close enough to touch? What if reaching out? What if hands finding hands? What then? Unknown. Will never be known because it will not happen. The thought of it is enough. The thought contains all satisfaction allowed. The thought is the thing itself, perfected in imagination, untainted by reality. If the thought were acted upon, if made real, it would become smaller, ordinary, just another moment in time, subject to disappointment and regret and all the ways reality diminishes fantasy. So keeping the thought, holding it in mind like treasure, not acting on it. And she, standing behind in the corridor, is doing the same, thinking about crossing the distance, imagining it, feeling in her mind what it would be like to stand close, to touch, to break silence with words or with something beyond words. But she will not do it. She knows the rules as well. She knows this is the bargain. This is the price of intimacy, distance, restraint, endless deferral, a sound of movement, small, a shift of weight, rustle of fabric. She is adjusting position, perhaps, or preparing to leave. No turning to look. Eyes remain on window, on rain. After a moment, footsteps again, soft, retreating, growing fainter. A door opens and closes. She is gone, alone again, exhaling slowly. Breath had been held without awareness. Shoulders relax slightly. Tension eases, just a fraction. But it does not disappear. It never disappears. Always there, a low-level strain carried everywhere like a weight that cannot be put down. Turning from window, walking back down the corridor, door still closed, light still gray. Nothing has changed. But something has happened. She was here, together in the same space, even though no looking, no speaking, no touching occurred. The silence was shared, the stillness was shared, and that sharing, minimal as it was, will sustain for hours, perhaps days. It will be thought about, remembered. The sound of her breathing, the rustle of her dress, the moment when she stopped, the moment when she left. These details will be examined the way a scholar examines ancient texts, searching for meaning in every nuance, every inflection. The Victorian world was built on such nuances, on such unspoken communications. The entire social structure depended on people being able to understand and respond to subtle signals while maintaining flawless public composure. This was not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It was a sophisticated system that acknowledged the existence of inner life while insisting that inner life remain private. One could feel anything, passion, desire, rage, despair, as long as those feelings were not crudely displayed. The result was a culture of enormous intensity, beneath a surface of perfect calm, a culture where people lived double lives as a matter of course, not through deliberate deception, but because the culture itself was structured around the divide between public and private, between what was shown and what was felt, and for those caught in impossible situations, desiring someone they could not have, loving someone they could not marry. This structure provided, if not comfort, at least a framework for managing the unmanageable, a way to have a relationship that could not officially exist, a way to love from a distance. It was not ideal. It caused suffering, but it also generated a kind of meaning, a kind of depth that perhaps cannot exist when everything is permitted, when every desire can be immediately expressed and satisfied. The Victorians understood that limitation can intensify experience, that denial can sharpen longing, that distance can create a kind of closeness that proximity never achieves. Whether this understanding made their lives better or worse is impossible to say. It simply made their lives what they were, lives lived largely in the mind, in memory, in imagination. Lives where the most important events were often the ones that never happened, where the deepest connections were the ones never consummated, where love was measured not in touch or words, but in the endless, patient maintenance of a silence that said everything. And in that silence, in that distance, in that absence, they found not happiness, perhaps, but something else, something harder to name, a kind of beauty, a kind of truth, a kind of intimacy that existed only in the space between what was and what might have been. This was Victorian life for many. This was how desire was experienced, how love was known, how intimacy was achieved, not through the body, but through the disciplined, deliberate, endlessly restrained attention of one mind to another across a distance that would never be crossed. And when night came, when each was alone in their room, in their bed, in the darkness, they would remember, they would think, they would imagine, and in those private hours, in that secret interior life, they would live more vividly than they ever could in the public world of parlors and ballrooms and dining rooms. Because the mind has no limits. The mind can hold a moment forever. The mind can return to it, examine it from every angle, extract from it endless layers of meaning and feeling. And so they did, night after night, year after year, holding on to moments that lasted only seconds, treasuring glances that were barely exchanged, building entire emotional worlds around silences that were never broken. This was their inheritance. This was what their culture gave them, and within its confines they created lives of extraordinary depth, lives lived almost entirely beneath the surface, invisible to casual observation, but real nonetheless, real and intense, and filled with a longing that never dimmed, a desire that never died, an intimacy that endured precisely because it was never fulfilled. And when they finally slept, when consciousness finally released its grip, they dreamed. They dreamed of corridors and gardens and drawing rooms. They dreamed of standing close without touching. They dreamed of silence that spoke volumes. They dreamed of moments that never happened and therefore could never be taken away. This was Victorian desire. This was Victorian love. This was the art of living with impossibility, not overcoming it, but learning to find within it a kind of terrible, beautiful perfection. Morning arrives, as it always does, indifferent to what has transpired in the night. The gray light of dawn fills the room slowly, revealing familiar objects in their familiar places. One wakes with the residue of dreams still clinging to consciousness, fragments of corridors and gardens, the phantom sensation of proximity, the echo of breathing that was not one's own. The rituals of morning begin, water in the basin, cold enough to shock the system into full wakefulness. The methodical process of dressing, each garment a layer not just of fabric, but of social armor. By the time one is fully clothed, the dream self has been successfully buried beneath the public self. The face in the mirror is composed, appropriate, ready to meet the day's demands. But underneath, always underneath, the other self persists. The self that spent the night in imagined rooms with an imagined version of her. The self that knows every detail of her face, her hands, her movements, with an intensity that borders on the obsessive. That self cannot be entirely suppressed. It colors everything, even the most mundane activities of the day. Breakfast is a performance, as all meals are performances. One enters the room, serves oneself from the sideboard, takes a seat. Others are present, family members, house guests, the rotating cast of characters that populates a Victorian household. Conversation occurs in the approved manner, Mild observations about the weather, plans for the day, neutral topics that require nothing of substance from anyone. And then she enters. The room does not change visibly. No one else seems to notice anything remarkable. But for one who has learned to read the subtle alterations in atmosphere, everything shifts. The quality of light seems different. The air feels charged with a particular kind of attention. She takes her place at the table, neither near nor far, always that carefully calculated middle distance. She does not greet directly. To do so would be to acknowledge something that must not be acknowledged. Instead, she offers a general good morning to the room at large, and one responds in kind, voice carefully neutral, eyes not quite meeting hers. This was the daily navigation required in such circumstances. Every interaction had to be calibrated to avoid both excessive distance, which might provoke comment, and excessive intimacy, which would be disastrous. The goal was perfect ordinariness, a performance so flawless that no observer would suspect the extraordinary currents running beneath the surface. Throughout the meal, awareness of her presence is constant. The small sound she makes, the clink of her cup against its saucer, the soft clearing of her throat before speaking, are catalogued and stored. One knows without looking when she reaches for the jam, when she sets down her fork, when she shifts slightly in her chair. This attention is automatic now, operating below the level of conscious thought. She has become a fixed point around which all perception organizes itself. And she, one must believe, is doing the same, tracking movements and sounds with the same obsessive precision, building her own catalog of observed details. Otherwise, how to make sense of the small signs she occasionally offers? The way her hand sometimes pauses mid-gesture when one speaks, the barely perceptible intake of breath when one enters a room. These are not accidents. They cannot be accidents. The meal ends. People disperse to their various activities. One finds oneself in the library again, that refuge of quietude and solitude where one can temporarily escape the demands of social performance. The books are old friends now, their leather bindings familiar under fingertips. But even here, even surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of centuries, the mind cannot rest. It returns, as it always returns, to the same preoccupations. What is she doing at this moment? Is she in her room, attending to correspondence? Is she in the drawing room, receiving visitors? Is she perhaps in the garden, walking among the flower beds, her dress moving gently in the breeze? And more pressingly, what does she think about during her own solitary moments? When she is alone with her thoughts, freed temporarily from the necessity of performance, where does her mind go? Does it go to the same places? Does she replay their encounters with the same meticulous attention to detail? Does she construct elaborate scenarios in which circumstances are different, rules are suspended, distance is closed? One wants desperately to believe she does, needs to believe it, because the alternative, that all this intensity is one-sided, that what feels like mutual recognition is actually solitary delusion, is unbearable. But there is no way to know, no way to ask. The rules that govern their interaction make such direct inquiry impossible. So one is left with inference, with interpretation, with the painstaking analysis of tiny signals that might mean everything or might mean nothing at all. This uncertainty is perhaps the most exquisite torture of all. Worse than the restraint, worse than the distance, is the not knowing. The possibility that one is alone in this obsession, that she goes about her life untroubled by the longings that consume one's every waking hour. But no, there have been signs, definite signs. The way she moved closer in the garden, that was not imagination. The quality of her breathing when they stand near each other, that changes perceptibly. The glances she offers across crowded rooms, those are real, deliberate, meant to be seen. She feels it too. She must. The alternative is madness. The afternoon brings an unexpected development. A visitor arrives, a relation of the family, come to stay for a few days. The house stirs with the activity of hospitality. Servants rush to prepare a room. The family gathers to greet the newcomer. One is obliged to join them, to play the part of welcoming host or polite fellow guest, depending on one's precise position in the household hierarchy. She is there as well, of course, standing with the others, wearing her public face, the one that reveals nothing. She greets the visitor warmly, inquires about their journey, makes all the appropriate remarks. She is perfectly natural, perfectly at ease. To any outside observer, she is simply a well-bred woman fulfilling her social obligations with practiced grace. But one has learned to look beneath the surface, and beneath her polished exterior, something can be detected. A slight tightness around her eyes, a quality to her smile that does not quite reach the level of genuine warmth. She is performing as they are all performing, but the performance requires more effort today than usual. Why? What has changed? Is it simply fatigue? Or is it something else? Is it possible? And here hope flares dangerously that she too finds these social obligations increasingly burdensome, that she too longs for the possibility of a different kind of interaction, one not governed by rigid protocols and endless pretense. The visitor is shown to their room. The gathering disperses. One retreats again, this time to one's own room, ostensibly to attend to some correspondence, but really just to escape the suffocating atmosphere of forced sociability. Sitting at the writing desk, paper before one, pen in hand. A letter should be written. There are always letters to be written, social obligations to be met through the medium of carefully crafted prose. But the words will not come. The mind is too agitated, too full of other thoughts. Instead, almost without conscious decision, writing of a different kind begins. Not a letter to be sent, but an entry in the private journal that has been kept sporadically for years now. A place to record thoughts that cannot be spoken, feelings that cannot be shown, observations that cannot be shared. The pen moves across the page. She was particularly withdrawn today at tea. The visitor's presence seems to weigh on her. Or perhaps I only imagine this because I wish it to be true, because I want to believe she finds our current circumstances as intolerable as I do. But there were signs, the way she held herself, the brittleness of her smile. She is not at ease. Something troubles her. I wonder if she knows how completely she occupies my thoughts. I wonder if she would be flattered or frightened if she knew the extent of my preoccupation. Every gesture she makes, every word she speaks, I analyze endlessly, searching for hidden meanings, for signs of reciprocal feeling. This cannot be healthy. This cannot be normal. And yet I cannot stop. She has become the fixed point around which my entire existence revolves. Everything else, duties, obligations, social relations, all of it seems hollow by comparison. Only when I am observing her, thinking about her, imagining scenarios involving her, do I feel truly alive. What would happen if I simply went to her? If I requested a private conversation? If I spoke plainly about what I feel? The very thought makes my hands shake. The consequences would be catastrophic if she does not share my feelings, and how can I be certain she does? I would be exposed, humiliated, possibly expelled from this household and from polite society more broadly. And even if she does share them, what then? We cannot marry. The circumstances make it impossible. So what would such a confession accomplish, except to make explicit what must remain implicit? Better to continue as we are, with our silent understanding, our restrained interactions, our private worlds of imagination where anything is possible. And yet this restraint is killing me. Slowly, inexorably, it is draining the life from me. I am becoming a ghost, haunting the corridors of this house, existing more vividly in my imagination than in my actual daily life. The writing stops. Reading back over what has been written, a wave of self-disgust rises. How pathetic it sounds! How maudlin and self-pitying! A grown person reduced to this, scribbling melodramatic confessions in a private journal, obsessing over someone who may or may not return their feelings. And yet, what else is there? What other outlet exists for these feelings? They must go somewhere. They must be expressed somehow, even if only in the privacy of written words that no one else will ever read. The journal is closed and locked away in its drawer. The key is hidden. These precautions are necessary. The very existence of such a document is dangerous. If discovered, it would be proof positive of improper feelings, of thoughts that should not be thought, of desires that should not be entertained. The Victorians lived in constant fear of exposure. Their inner lives were perpetually at risk of being revealed through careless letters, discovered diaries, indiscreet servants. Privacy was precious and precarious. One learned to hide everything that mattered, to present only the most acceptable version of oneself to the world. And so the performance continued day after day, week after week. The acceptable self interacted with the world while the true self remained locked away, known only through furtive journal entries and solitary imaginings. Evening approaches. The household prepares for dinner. One dresses with particular care tonight, not because there is any special occasion, but because she will be there, and her presence always demands one's best effort. Descending the stairs toward the dining room, one pauses on the landing. Voices drift up from below, the visitor conversing with other members of the household, discussing something trivial. One should join them, but the prospect is wearying. These social gatherings, once tolerable, if not enjoyable, have become increasingly burdensome. The forced conversation, the false cheerfulness, the relentless pretense that everything is normal, it all requires such tremendous energy. While hesitating on the landing, a sound comes from behind. Turning, one finds her there. She has emerged from her room and is approaching the stairs. For a moment, just a moment, they are alone together in the hallway. No servants, no family members, no witnesses. She stops. There is perhaps 6 feet of space between them. It might as well be 6 miles. The distance is absolute, uncrossable. And yet the very fact of this unexpected privacy creates a charge in the air, a heightened awareness that makes every second feel elongated, significant. Neither speaks. What would be said? Good evening? The greeting would be absurd in its inadequacy, a pitiful attempt to contain this moment within conventional bounds. Better to say nothing? Better to simply stand here and acknowledge, through silence, the impossibility of speech. She is looking at one directly now. Not the sidelong glances of the drawing room, not the careful non-looking of the dining table, but a full, direct gaze. Her eyes are searching, questioning. What is she looking for? What does she hope to find in one's face? One looks back, equally direct. This is dangerous. This is too much. If anyone were to round the corner and see them standing here, looking at each other with such obvious intensity, questions would be raised. But for this moment, the danger is irrelevant. All that matters is this: her face, her eyes, her presence. She opens her mouth slightly, as though about to speak, but no words come. The impulse dies before reaching articulation. Instead, her expression shifts. Sadness crosses her features, unmistakable and profound. It is there for only an instant before she masters it, before her public face reasserts itself. But one has seen it. That flash of sorrow, of longing, of something that looks very much like despair. So she does feel it. She does. That moment of unguarded emotion is proof she is not indifferent. She is not merely tolerating one's attention with polite forbearance. She is suffering the same torment, feeling the same impossible longing. The knowledge is devastating and exhilarating in equal measure. To know she suffers too should bring no comfort. What kind of person takes pleasure in another's pain? And yet there is relief in it. Relief in knowing one is not alone, that this is shared agony, not solitary delusion. Her expression has closed now. The moment of vulnerability has passed. She walks past, moving toward the stairs, and one steps aside to let her pass. For an instant, as she moves by, the distance between them narrows to mere inches. The fabric of her dress whispers against the air. A faint scent reaches one's awareness. Lavender and something else, something uniquely her. And then she is past, descending the stairs, leaving one standing alone on the landing with a heart beating far too rapidly and a mind racing with the implications of what has just occurred. That look, that expression of sorrow, it changes everything and nothing. Now there is certainty. She feels it too. But what good is certainty when circumstances remain unchanged? Knowing she shares these feelings only makes the impossibility more acute. It would almost be easier if she were indifferent. At least then one would be suffering alone, not inflicting suffering on another. But she is not indifferent. And now one must carry this knowledge, must live with the awareness that every moment of restraint, every instance of maintained distance, every performance of polite indifference causes her the same pain it causes oneself. This is the cruelty of Victorian life for those caught in such predicaments. Mutual suffering with no possibility of mutual comfort, shared longing with no prospect of shared fulfillment. Two people trapped in the same cage, able to see each other, but unable to reach across the space between them. Dinner is an ordeal. The visitor dominates conversation, telling long, meandering stories about their travels, their acquaintances, their opinions on various matters. One makes appropriate responses when required, laughs at the appropriate moments, maintains the fiction of attention and interest. She sits across the table, as she usually does. She is equally attentive to the visitor, equally skilled at performing interest. To an outside observer, they are simply two people among many, participating unremarkably in an ordinary social gathering. But underneath the table, one's hands are clenched in one's lap. The tension of maintaining composure is almost physical in its intensity. Every time she speaks, one's attention sharpens. Every time she laughs, that polite, restrained laugh she employs in company, something twists inside. Because now one knows. Now there is certainty. That expression on the landing was unmistakable. She suffers as one suffers. She longs as one longs. And knowing this makes every moment of forced normalcy, of pretended indifference, unbearable. How do people bear this? How did generations of Victorians navigate these impossible situations? How did they sit at dinner tables and make polite conversation while their hearts were breaking? How did they maintain perfect propriety while everything inside them screamed for release? They did it because they had no choice. Because the alternative, social ruin, familial disgrace, possibly even worse consequences, was unthinkable. So they learned to compartmentalize, to separate the feeling self from the performing self, to live double lives with such skill that even they sometimes lost track of which self was real. The meal ends eventually. As people rise from the table, there is a moment of confusion, of general movement. In that moment, one finds oneself briefly near her, not touching, never touching, but close enough to speak quietly without being overheard. And without planning it, without consciously deciding to do so, one whispers, "The garden, tomorrow, early." She does not respond, does not even look over, but there is the slightest inclination of her head, agreement, acknowledgement, or merely coincidental movement. One moves away before anything further can happen, before anyone can notice the exchange. The heart is racing again. What has just been done? What proposal has been made? To suggest a private meeting, even in a space as relatively public as the garden, it is dangerous, improper, a clear violation of the unspoken rules that have governed their interaction until now. But something has shifted. That moment on the landing has changed the equation. Restraint that was bearable when one believed it might be one-sided becomes unbearable when one knows it is mutually felt. If they are both suffering, both longing, both existing in the same state of perpetual, unfulfilled desire, then surely something must change. Some accommodation must be found. The rest of the evening passes in a fog. One participates in the drawing room activities. Cards are played, music is performed, conversation continues, but true presence is impossible. The mind is elsewhere, already in tomorrow's garden, already imagining what might be said, what might happen, when they finally have the opportunity to speak privately. Sleep, when it finally comes, is fitful and full of anxious dreams. Gardens that shift and change, conversations that begin but never reach their conclusion. Her face appearing and disappearing in mist. The familiar landscape of restless sleep for one whose waking life provides no resolution, no satisfaction. Morning arrives gray and cool. One wakes early, far earlier than necessary, and dresses quickly. The house is still quiet. Most are still asleep. This is the time of servants, of early risers, of those with urgent business elsewhere. One descends the stairs carefully, avoiding the creaking boards that might alert others to one's passage. Through the hallway, past the still dark drawing room, toward the door that leads to the garden. Outside, the air is fresh and sharp. Dew covers everything, making the grass wet and the stone paths slippery. The garden is beautiful in this early light, softened by mist, peaceful in its solitude. One walks to the rose garden, to the place where she stood that other afternoon, holding something in her hand. This seems the most likely meeting place, the most obvious location. So one waits there, standing among the roses, breathing in their scent mixed with the damp earth smell of morning. Time passes, perhaps 10 minutes, perhaps 15. Doubt begins to creep in. Did she understand the whispered words? Did she agree to come? Or has one made a terrible mistake, misinterpreting her small nod as agreement when it was merely coincidence? But then she appears, emerging from the mist like a figure in a painting wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She walks directly toward where one stands, no hesitation in her step. So she did understand. She did agree. She is here. They stand facing each other among the roses, 6 feet apart. Always that distance. Even now, even in this moment of deliberate private meeting, the space between them is maintained. Now that she is here, all the things one planned to say have evaporated. The carefully constructed speeches, the rehearsed declarations, all of it gone, replaced by profound inability to speak. She seems equally unable to begin. They stand in silence, looking at each other. The moment stretches. Somewhere a bird begins to sing. The normal sounds of morning beginning. But here, in this rose garden, time feels suspended. Finally, she speaks. Her voice is low, almost a whisper, though there is no one nearby to overhear. We cannot continue like this. The words are simple, but they land with tremendous weight. Cannot continue like this. It is both statement and question, agreement and plea. I know, one manages to reply, but I do not know what else to do. She looks down at her hands, clasped tightly together in front of her. Neither do I. I only know that this distance, this pretense, it is becoming impossible to maintain. There is pain in her voice, real pain. Hearing it spoken aloud rather than merely inferred from glances and silences makes it newly devastating. On the landing yesterday, one ventures, "You looked—" "I know how I looked," she interrupts. "I could not help it. Seeing you there so close and knowing we could not." She stops, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. The silence returns. But it is different now. It is a silence full of things said, not things unsaid. They have crossed a boundary. They have acknowledged openly what has existed only in inference and implication. What do you want? The question escapes before one can consider whether it should be asked. She looks up, meets one's eyes directly. I want what cannot be had. I want circumstances to be different. I want a world where we could. Again, she stops. But that world does not exist. We live in this one, where there are rules and consequences and impossibilities. So we do nothing? We simply continue as we have been? What else can we do? Her voice breaks slightly. Tell me, and I will do it. But I cannot see a path forward that does not lead to ruin for both of us. And she is right. Of course she is right. There is no path forward. Marriage is impossible. The circumstances of family, of social position, of a dozen practical considerations make it so. And anything else, any other form of relationship, would be scandal, disaster, complete social death. So they are left with this. Standing in a garden at dawn, finally speaking honestly to each other only to confirm what they both already knew, that their situation is impossible, that there is no solution, that they are trapped. I think about you constantly, one says, because it must be said, because this moment of honesty may never come again. Every waking moment, you are in my thoughts. You have become the center of my existence. Everything else is merely peripheral. She closes her eyes. A single tear escapes, trails down her cheek. "And I you?" she whispers. I thought at first I was imagining your attention, that I was constructing meaning where none existed. But then I realized you were doing the same. We have been conducting an entire relationship in silence, in glances, in careful distances. Is that enough? The question is desperate. Can we continue with only that? She opens her eyes. It will have to be, because the alternative is to have nothing at all. If we attempt more, if we are discovered, we will be separated completely. At least this way we can see each other. We can have these moments. She is right. Again, she is right. This is the terrible calculus of Victorian forbidden love. A little is better than nothing. Restraint is better than exposure. Suffering is bearable if it means preserving even the limited connection they have. Then we continue, one says. We maintain the distance. We preserve the silence. We go on as we have been. Yes, she agrees. We go on. But something has changed. Having spoken these things aloud, having confirmed their mutual feelings, having acknowledged the impossibility of their situation, it has altered the landscape. They can no longer pretend ignorance. They can no longer hide behind the fiction that perhaps the other does not feel the same. Now they know, and they must carry that knowledge forward into all their future interactions. Every glance will be informed by it. Every silence will be weighted with it. Every moment of maintained distance will hurt more, because now they both know it is hurting the other too. This is the cruelty they have inflicted on themselves by speaking. They have made explicit what was better left implicit. They have brought their suffering into the light, where it is more painful, not less. I should return, she says, before I am missed. Yes, one agrees, though the thought of her leaving is agonizing. She turns to go, then pauses. Without looking back, she says, "It helps, knowing you feel it too. It does not make it easier, but it helps." And then she is walking away, disappearing back into the mist, leaving one alone in the rose garden with the morning birds and the weight of everything that has been said and cannot be unsaid. The day proceeds normally on the surface. Breakfast, morning activities, luncheon. The visitor continues to dominate conversation, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents in the household. But everything is different. When she enters a room now, when their eyes meet across the table, there is new knowledge there. They have spoken. They have confirmed. There can be no more pretending, no more self-deception, and it is worse. Knowing certainly that she suffers as one suffers makes every moment of restraint actively painful. Before, there was at least the anesthetic of uncertainty, the possibility that perhaps one was making too much of small signs, that perhaps she was merely being polite, that perhaps the intensity was all on one side. But now there is no such comfort. Now every smile she offers to someone else, every laugh she gives in response to the visitor's tedious stories, every moment of her attention directed elsewhere, all of it is knowingly an act. She is performing, as one is performing, and they are both aware they are performing, and the awareness makes the performance excruciating. That night, alone in one's room, the journal is brought out again. We spoke this morning. Finally, after all these months, we spoke honestly to each other. And what did our honesty accomplish? Nothing, except to make clear what we both already knew, that our situation is impossible, that there is no solution, that we are condemned to continue as we have been. She cried. I saw her tears. The knowledge that I cause her such pain is unbearable. And yet what can I do? Leaving would not help. I am not free to simply depart, and even if I were, the pain of separation would be worse than the pain of proximity. We are trapped, both of us, in this house, in these circumstances, in this terrible situation where we can have neither each other nor freedom from each other. She said it helps, knowing I feel it too. I am not sure I agree. Knowledge has made everything more acute, more painful. Ignorance was perhaps a blessing, but there is no going back. We have spoken. We have acknowledged. Now we must live with what we have acknowledged. The days that follow establish a new pattern. On the surface, nothing has changed. They maintain the same distances, observe the same proprieties, perform the same roles. But underneath, there is new intensity. Every interaction is freighted with their private knowledge. Every glance confirms and reconfirms what they said in the garden. And once a week, sometimes more, if opportunity allows, they contrive to meet briefly in some private place. Never for long. Never in circumstances that could be truly compromising. But enough to speak a few words, to acknowledge each other without witnesses, to momentarily drop the exhausting performance of indifference. These meetings become the skeleton around which all else is organized. The week is measured not in days, but in the intervals between these brief encounters. Everything else, meals, social gatherings, daily activities, is merely filler, time to be endured until the next stolen moment of privacy. This is how it continues. This is how it will continue. Perhaps for years, perhaps forever. They have found an accommodation, a way to have something when they cannot have everything. It is not satisfying. It is not enough. But it is what they have. And in the larger scheme of Victorian life, they are not unusual. In houses across England, across Europe, similar dramas are playing out. Other people are conducting other relationships in silence and restraint. Other hearts are breaking quietly behind composed faces. Other lives are being lived primarily in imagination rather than reality. This was the system. This was what the culture produced, and people adapted to it as humans adapt to all systems, finding ways to survive within constraints, extracting what meaning and beauty they could from situations that offered little of either. The Victorians were not happier than we are, but they were perhaps better at bearing unhappiness. They had practice at it. They had been trained from childhood to endure, to restrain, to sacrifice personal desires for larger social goods. And if that training produced suffering, well, suffering was expected. Suffering was normal. One bore it with dignity and in silence because that was what was done. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, there were moments of grace, moments when the restraint itself became beautiful, when the discipline of not touching created a kind of intimacy that touching could never achieve, when the silence between two people became more eloquent than any words could be. These moments did not make the suffering worthwhile. Nothing could do that. But they made it bearable. They transformed mere endurance into something that could almost be called meaning. And in their private hours, in their journals and letters and solitary thoughts, the Victorians recorded it all. They wrote it down, not for publication, not for others to read, but for themselves, to bear witness to their own lives, to insist that what they felt, though it could not be openly expressed, was nonetheless real. And now, more than a century later, we can read those private documents and recognize in them something we thought was unique to our own time. The human heart in all its complexity, its contradictions, its capacity for both suffering and beauty. The Victorians were not so different from us. They loved, they longed, they suffered. They simply did it more quietly, more privately, with more restraint, and perhaps in some ways with more intensity. Because what is restrained does not dissipate. It concentrates, it deepens, it becomes something pure and distilled. Painful, yes, but also strangely perfect in its very impossibility. This is what they created in those gardens and corridors and drawing rooms. Not happiness, not fulfillment, but something else, something harder to name, a kind of love that existed entirely in the space between people, a kind of intimacy that required no touch, a kind of relationship that was no less real for being mostly imagined. And when they were old, when they looked back on their lives, what they remembered was not always the things that actually happened. What they remembered were the things that almost happened, the moments of possibility, the silences full of unspoken words, the distances that were never crossed but that, in not being crossed, became sacred spaces of their own. This was Victorian life. This was Victorian love. And it was, in its own way, magnificent.